Okay, so this morning we'll do a review of what we did Friday afternoon. So the goal was to add to our movie info site Markdown support so that people could format their text when they submit it as a summary. And we were going to use GitHub's API to do it. You wouldn't do this in real life, but it just shows how to use an API to do something. We'll see more examples of other APIs today. So this one, what we want to do is add that to the movie info site. So what I'm going to do is copy this movie info site and make in week 4, day 1, and paste it into there. Okay. And so it has the app YAML, it has all this other stuff I had already. And so we have these routes. I don't think we have to add any new routes because it's existing functionality. What we have to do is add in here somewhere the Markdown, right? Makes sense? So the idea here is that I get the summary here, and I want to fill in this function. And then it'll give me a new summary. So this summary is Markdown, and this summary is HTML. And so the idea here is I want to write this function. But otherwise, it all stays the same. I save it into the search index the same way. I'll explain this in a second. But I just want to write this function. So I already wrote it, so I'm going to write it again. And we'll just start over, okay? So making a function is called render Markdown. You'll give it a context, app engine context, and text you want to render. Now this would be Markdown text. If you don't remember what Markdown looks like, it's something like you can have equals for headers. You can have star for italic. So you put things in stars, and then if you do 2 stars, I think it's bold. It's these really basic formatting. If you imagine that all you had was plain text email, this might be how you format in plain text email. It's human readable, you can see the text, but you add these little things to make it stand out a little better. And what it does is it transforms those kinds of things into HTML. So you end up with, there's probably an H3 or something, headers and italic. I guess you'd use EM instead of I. I is considered evil. Though at this point, they've been fighting that battle for 15 years, so maybe it's time to give up. Like you use strong instead of bold, you use EM instead of I. Does anybody know why? Why people don't like I and B?
Because they don't want an I and an italic and then bold and then bold. I don't know.
There's a good reason for it.
Those are appearance things, the CSS.
Exactly. So saying strong is like semantic. It's giving meaning to the content. Saying bold is formatting, right? And that's their argument. I think the argument is pretty flimsy because strong is a synonym of bold. So they're not really different words. But anyway, maybe the argument for the EM tag is better. So anyway, that's the idea, is that we take in the Markdown and we give us HTML. And so we'll have our users be able to enter formatting like that, and then we'll give them HTML on the page. Why would we do this? Why wouldn't we just let them write HTML?
Script tags.
Script tags, that's a big reason. Because if they can write HTML, they can write script tags, and then they can execute JavaScript on our site. And we don't want to allow that. Now we could fix that. We could catch script tags, but what? Is there any other reason why we might want to prevent HTML?
Not everybody knows HTML.
Well, that's a big part of it. Markdown's a lot easier to understand than HTML because it just looks like regular formatting. For example, a block quote in Markdown is like this, and that's how you might do it if you were just writing it yourself. Use that little caret and then say this is a quote. And so that'll work nicely
That's maybe easier to understand than block code. The other reason is that, you know, with HTML, they could just put a /strong without the opening. That's probably not that big of a deal, but they could put a /div, and that probably is a big deal. You can break your whole layout of your site with just a straight HTML tag. And so, Markdown's a safer language. It's easier for the user, and it's safer because it has a much smaller set of instructions that it supports. So you can't break the page with it. Okay, it supports things like links and stuff too, but the point is we want to be able to do this. Now normally the correct way to do this, what would be the right way to do this? If I gave you this task and you wanted to make it happen to do it, what would you do?
Well, my first thought would be how could I run it on the server without making a call to another server? So maybe there'd be something I can install on the server that would run.
Yeah. So
or a go get plugin from somewhere.
exactly. So I would go to GoDoc and search for Markdown and see what I could find. And look, here's a Markdown processor, and I would probably use one of these libraries to do it. This one seems to have a ton of features. You know, and there's also this one. There's a bunch. And so I play around, look and see which ones are popular, maybe figure out which one does what I want it to do. And then I'd import it and use it. But we're going to use GitHub to do it, so we'll take a look at that. So we need to get API for GitHub to do Markdown. So I just search for that. And they have this API documentation here that I just Googled for. And then there's these two, render an arbitrary Markdown document. And so you post to their API endpoint /Markdown, and you can give it text, and it like this. This is the format of the input, and it would give you back HTML. So we could use that. It turns out there's another one at the bottom that's even easier. You go to post to Markdown /raw. You just give it the Markdown, not as JSON, just as text, and it gives you back the HTML. So we'll use this one instead. So it says it takes a Markdown document as plain text and renders it as plain Markdown without a repository context, blah, blah, blah. That's easier than doing this, right? I don't have to build this object. I can just hand it this object. Okay, so we have to post to /Markdown /raw. The question here is what's their actual API endpoint, and that's described here. It's this. So I'll copy that. So it would be this part plus /Markdown /raw would be the full URL. So I'm going to copy that and save it as a constant. So GitHub API URL. Maybe I'll add a slash to it. That's the kind of thing you would want to use a constant for. It doesn't have to be capitalized. Because if I was making lots of these calls, I might use it again and again. Okay, so to get our URL, we're going to have to say it's URL fetch.client. Remember, URL fetch is the library we use to make outbound HTTP requests. So we are making an HTTP request to GitHub, and so we have to use URL fetch to do it. So we do that. That's going to create a client. I think you can return an error. No, it doesn't. I guess it only returns the error when you actually make the call. So now we have a client, and you remember what client has on it? It has do, get, head, post form, some other stuff. So if we go look at their docs, so if we want to use this one, it's a post. Okay? So we use post. So post will take the GitHub API URL plus Markdown /raw. Maybe I'll take out that other slash just so it matches. So I just got that URL from building, appending that post /Markdown /raw to the end of it. So that's where I got that. Now post takes some other things. It takes
a body type and a body. Okay. So the body type is, if you were doing JSON, it would be application/JSON. But this isn't JSON. It's text/plain. This is plain text. Remember, this raw endpoint doesn't take JSON. It takes regular plain text or type or text/X markup.
I guess we can use that. That's a like made up content type. Often if you see the X dash preceding it, that's like a fictitious, not agreed upon thing. I'm not sure it even matters, but you know, if we're gonna send it, might as well send the right one. Okay.
So now we have our URL, and we have our content type, body type, and now we gotta send the body. So what's the body gonna do?
It's gonna be the text.
Exactly. So if we looked at post, post actually takes a reader as the body. And so how can we get a reader from text, from a string?
Strings.newReader.
Yeah. Strings.newReader. Okay. Now this will return a response and possibly an error. So it's if there's an error, we return nothing and the error. Otherwise, okay. So now we have to get
The response, since it's a post, well, it would also have this. It's gonna have a body. And the body is what the server responded with, as bytes, or as a reader, really. And so we have to convert that into a string, because we're returning a string, right? So how do we do that? So I have a reader, and I want to turn it into a string. So we had a string and turned it into a reader. I'm going to go the other way around.
we can use ioutil.readAll, and you give it the reader. So that's response.body. And since it has a close, I should close it eventually. And that's going to give me back a slice of bytes. I'm just going to ignore the error. And we can turn a slice of bytes into a string by just doing that. Okay? Does that make sense?
So I create a HTTP client using the URL fetch package from App Engine. I then do a post request to GitHub's API /markdown/raw. Give it the content type that's set in the docs, and give it the body of it. The body is the text, the Markdown the user entered. If there's an error, I return that, and then I'll close the body eventually, and then I read the response body as bytes, and then I convert those bytes into a string, and that's how I get HTML back, okay? So we're using GitHub's API to render Markdown. So if this worked, when we submit the new movie form, I get the summary here, and I call render Markdown. So summary at this point, this summary here, because it's overriding the old summary variable, will be HTML. So I'll have HTML instead of Markdown. I took the user's Markdown and turned it into HTML. And so the other change I made to this is right here. So in my movie type, I changed summary from a string to a search HTML. And what this is a special type for search that supports searching over HTML documents. I told you that before, right? Where in our standard HTML document, you have some content, right? So you have your HTML, and the issue with this is if I do a search, just using the search engine, and treat it like a string, if I search for the query, strong, the issue is that I get back this document because there's a strong tag, but I shouldn't, because this is not actually part of the content of the document. It's describing the format of the document. It should only be searching the text, right? Because when I search, I don't want to search for elements in an HTML document. I want to search for the actual text of the document. And so by changing the type from string to search HTML, it tells the search service, hey, I'm going to give you HTML, so treat it like HTML, which means basically ignore the text. Only index the text content. Okay. So that's what I did there. And that's a type that, if we look at search.html, it is a string, right? That's its underlying type, but it just knows to index it differently. So that's the other change I made, was I changed summary to a search HTML, and then inside of here, I changed it here as well. Okay. And by doing that, it'll search better. Now, it would kind of work before, it's just not as good, that's all. This question?
No, I just said that's cool.
And that's described in their docs. And it's kind of thing you would discover if you got it wrong. People, you know, somebody would be like, why is the search acting funny? And you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm indexing, or maybe eventually you'd figure that out.
Or you'd bang your head against the wall for a week and then figure it out.
Okay, so, but otherwise this is the same. I'm still putting it into the search index the same way it was before.
So let's see if it worked. So week 4, day 1, movie info, go app, search. Whoops. So there's our movie info. I don't know, what's a movie? You can do Jaws. Jaws is a movie. Oh, I should probably put some formatting in there. Let me try that again.
Movie about 2 sharks.
We'll just...
Okay, so I added some markdown. Maybe we'd add a summary. We could add a list.
Let's try a list.
Okay. So you put the little star behind it. Okay, let's see what that does.
Okay, so it created this document. If we go look at that in the admin, we will see in this full text search, movies. Here we go.
See how it added HTML tags? So it is working. See that it's a little hard to see here, but a UL with LIs inside of it. So it converted my star whatever's into a list, and it added a strong tag around it too, and put a whole thing in a paragraph.
So what that means is when I search over here,
see how it renders it as HTML? So, and you can see there's italics and bold. So that makes sense, right?
That's neat.
yeah, not too hard. I mean, the additional code here was, I mean, we're talking
15 lines of code, so.
You're a good man, Paul.
thanks.
So in general, you know, it's not super terribly difficult to add this kind of functionality. You know, I don't think this would be any more code in any other, any less code in any other language really. It'd be very similar. If you did this in Python, it'd look almost identical. So this is a general, just, you know, it should look something like this.
It would be more verbose than, say, Java, but not that much more. Okay, so the other part of this was to add files. So, you know, if I go to IMDb and look for, I don't know, Minions. Isn't that a movie that's out now? Okay, so, and I look at Minions, you know, well, they've gone crazy. What have they done? The whole site changed. Okay, so most movies don't change the whole site with animated GIFs and stuff. They just do the poster, right? And so we want to add support to our thing for the poster, okay? So if you click a poster in IMDb, it won't let you right-click and download it. They think they're clever by preventing you from doing that. They're not clever because now since you know web development, you know you can just go to the inspector and get it this way. Right? And there you go. And now we can just save it. Well, see, the problem with all those things that people do is they only keep legitimate people out. But people who know what they're doing can always bypass them, so. It's just a lesson for people who try to do that. Everybody follow what I just did?
Yeah.
Pretty easy, like, it's not even hard. Okay, so now I have an image and I'd like to be able to upload it as our poster, right? And so I want to be able to go in here and type minions in the summary and then have a third input file down here where I can upload the poster. So how do we do that? Well, it's actually not too hard. What we do is we go here. Remember that if you ever have a file input, you have to change the enc type of your form to multi-part form data, okay? So that's the first step. Change the enc type of your form. Now, regular forms, you can use multi-part form data if you want. But in general, we don't do that. But since this one's going to have a file, we are. Okay, so I'm going to add label and call it poster. You don't have to use a for on a label if you embed inside the label the input. Okay, and then so this is input type equal file, and name will be poster. Okay. I think placeholder works, doesn't it? Never tried placeholder with a file. Truth is, file inputs are relatively rare. Increasingly, people don't use file inputs, they use drag and drop. Like if you're using Gmail, you can drag and drop a file as an attachment just by plopping it on your browser. I'm not going to cover that because that's JavaScript, and that's super in the weeds JavaScript. But that's increasingly how people are doing file uploads rather than an input field. Because it has better user experience, and you can upload folders and hold multiple files and all that kind of stuff. This can have one file, so a little more limited. Okay, so we add type file poster. So let's oops, look at that. Okay, so, and it's not very pretty, also not. Okay, so that's how you would normally add it, okay? And then you'd submit. Now we haven't done anything on our form, so it's just going to ignore it in the Go code and just drop it because we haven't changed it. So let's change it. So basically the idea here is, I get the title and summary, I just need to add the poster. Does anybody remember how we get a file out of a form? I don't use form value, I use something else.
Silence.
Use rec.formFile and give it a key, which we call poster. So rather than form value, use form file. This will return a file-like object, the headers of that object, and possibly an error. What this has is things like the file name that the user submitted with. And this has the contents of the file. Okay. Sometimes it's nice to know what the name of the file was. For our uses, for example, the name of the file would tell us the type. We could look at it, see the JPEG on the end, and say, oh, it's a JPEG. And maybe we could look at it and say, if they upload a zip file, I'm just going to have an error, right? In other words, anything that's not an image, maybe I would want to show an error. We're not going to do that, but you could use that error. So we're just going to ignore the header. So we don't care what they called it on there. Okay, so where are we going to store this image?
GCS.
Yes, in Google Cloud Storage. That's where we will store this image. You could store it in the data store, but that's probably a bad idea because it's big.
probably at least 100K, if not bigger. And so, increasingly, images are much, much bigger than they used to be. Now people, when they take a photo on their camera, it's very large. It's megabytes, right? And so, we can only store 1 megabyte in the data store per entity. So, we could easily surpass that with an image. So we want to store it in Google Cloud Storage.
So let's do that. I'm going to copy from our storage example this guy. Later today we will see a different way of doing this that might be slightly easier, but it's still going to be difficult. Maybe not as difficult as what this was. And I showed a couple people here how to do that, but we'll look at that later. For now, I'll just copy. What I'm going to do is create a new file, because this is starting to grow. So this is movie info, and I'm pasting in the get cloud context. So remember, I give it an app engine context, and it gives me a cloud context, which are both of the type context, but they're different contexts. And so this one is sort of derived from this one. But this is what lets me use Google Cloud Storage. It's kind of funny how many things it imports. Okay, so now we can do that. So what we want to be able to do is put a file. So we have a file. We have the contents of the file, right? We have an IO reader with that starts at the beginning of the file and will go to the end. So how do we want to store this poster in Google Cloud Storage? Remember, every item, every file in Google Cloud Storage has a bucket and a name. And that's actually about it, right? And so, how do we want to store these in Google Cloud Storage?
Can you repeat that? What has a bucket?
Every file inside of in Google Cloud Storage has a name associated with it, and they're all inside of some bucket somewhere.
So we need to give it a name and put it in a bucket.
Yeah.
So we need to give it a name. So I think what this will take is an app engine context, just because that tends to be the thing we pass around everywhere.
And I will take this and build this. But then the next thing is probably the name of the file.
And the last thing will be a reader.
And that will be the contents of the file. So the goal here is I'm going to take this reader and save it to Google Cloud Storage with the name that you passed.
And so maybe this probably, it's going to return an error. And that probably makes sense for our twit file. Everybody understand? So we're going to put this file with this name with these contents into Cloud Storage and return an error if something goes wrong. Now the bucket, we're going to hard code, because this project only is going to have one bucket. So we don't have to pass in the bucket, because we'll hard code. We probably also want to do the other direction, right? Eventually, so here I'm saving it. Now eventually if I go look at the movie, I'd like to see it. So I probably want to be able to get a file. And so I think we can do the same thing here. Give it a name. There's two ways we could do this. So okay, I have the context and name. What do I return?
You want to return the reader.
Yes, so we could do this. Notice it's a read closer, not a reader. Now, read closer is a reader. It also has to close. The reason we need that is you have to close the reader eventually. And so we want to return that so that the user knows, oh, I need to close it when I'm done with it. Otherwise, we have an open network connection, it never gets cleaned up. And so this, when I close it, it gets cleaned up. And then the error, because something could go wrong, and that will work. The other way we could have done this is we could have taken in a writer. And that would give us a nice, they would look very similar. But the downside of the writer is basically what you're saying is when you do a get file with a writer, you're saying get the file and copy the contents to the writer. And that makes it a little, in other words, this is a very fast function.
because it gives me a read closer. If I passed in a writer, well now it's doing a lot of work. It's actually doing a copy and stuff inside. And so that might be a little more cumbersome to work with. But you could do that either way. But this way will work. Okay, so we have our put file and get file. And before we implement them, so I'm just going to panic them. Let's add the code needed to use them, okay? So we'll come back and actually implement them. But at first we're going to plug in the code here, okay? Because I was working on this and didn't finish it. So before I forget what I was doing, it's like, let's go in here and plug it in. Okay, so if there's an error, we'll just show that error to the user. This can happen if they submit a bad file or they don't submit a file or some other reason. Okay, so now we have a poster. I don't know if we have to close it, but let's look. Yeah, so we do need to close it eventually. Since it has the close method, I make sure to close it if there's no error. Okay, so now I have the poster and I want to save it.
So that's an assumption you could make if you're ever unsure, like if it has a closed method, just add it on.
Yeah, that pattern of, if it has a closed method, you probably got to call it. The HTTP library is weird and the request body has a closed method that you don't have to call it. But most of the time you have to call it closed if it has one. If you're not sure, read the docs. The docs usually will tell you the rules. But if it has a closed, you probably have to call it. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call put file, right? Give it the context. I'm not sure the name yet. Talk about that in a second. And then the last thing will be the poster, right? And so there's an error. We'll show that error. Right. So I've not written this function yet, but this is how I'm going to call it, right? I'm going to say put file context some name and the poster, the file they put in. So what do we want to call the question marks here?
We could use the header.
We could call it based on we could give it a name based on what the user enters in. The downside of that approach is, what if two people upload two different images with the same name?
Then we can put the hash in there.
Yep. Well, we can't use the hash of the file name because then you'll end up with the same hash. We could use the hash of the contents of the poster, and then if two people upload different images with the same name, we'll end up two different hashes, so that'd be okay. And if two people upload two identical images, we get the same hash, but that's also probably okay. But, we don't have to do that. We could just use a UUID, right? Remember UUIDs? We could just generate an ID. So I'll just make a UUID. V4 is random. And then you just do string, okay? So I get an ID, a random ID, and then I say, put it in as that name. So this is going to have in the bucket a whole bunch of UUIDs for every poster, okay? What is this? Ooh, tricky. We should rename this poster ID. There we go. I accidentally have the same name of the variable here. Once again, one of these things that's like, oh, that's annoying, but then you're like, actually, that's really nice because otherwise I could have had weird functionality by reusing this variable. Okay, so poster ID, right? So here's what I'm proposing we do for our movie. We're going to add a type here called poster. Actually, poster ID string. So what we store in the data store is not the poster, we store the name of it, right? Does that make sense? So this is, like 20 bytes or something. and the image itself could be multiple megabytes stored in Google Cloud Storage. We're just storing a reference to it. Think of this like a pointer. It's the same idea. Okay. So I just need to fill that in here. So if we successfully save it, then we'll go down here and add it here. Poster ID, poster. Dot string. Because it's a UUID. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now to implement this guy. Because if we run this now, it'll just have an error. Because we haven't done this yet. Okay. So if we look at our other example, to put a file, we just do this, right? So get the cloud context. So I use the App Engine context to get the cloud context. And then we call new writer. The bucket name, so we need to save that here. What did I call this? Boot camp, I think. That was the bucket name we were using. And then instead of this, I just say name. Okay? So now I have a writer. Remember, that doesn't return an error, so I have to check it when I close it. And actually, I just can return that. Okay, and then in between, I just do io.copy. So you get the cloud context, you create a writer, you copy everything into the writer, what was from the reader, and then you close it. Okay. It's pretty, not too bad. To do the get file, it's the inverse operation. We get the cloud context. And I think it's just as easy as that's even easier. Because new reader returns a read closer, so we can just return it. Make sense? So let's see if this actually works. I'll be surprised if it works the first time. So minions, we already have it. Now notice I don't have to refresh. The reason I don't have to refresh is I haven't changed this form. So. Oh, I didn't run the app server as, yeah. Remember that crazy app server thing I have to run? Why is it taking so long? I don't know if I have that in my history. There is a history command. I don't know if you guys know this. And you can use grep. So there we go. I don't know if I still have this file, so this may not work either. So rather than heading up 300 times, you can just search the history that way.
That's cool.
Okay, it said it created it. Look, it's got a poster ID. So if we were to go look in the bucket, console.developers/project/ we have all this stuff we've uploaded. This is it. Okay, so this is the file I just uploaded. Okay,
So maybe we would want a name that's more readable, but this works. You know, maybe we would store it in /posters or something, but the basic idea works. So to add to the get, we just have to change in here. So if I do this, and then we go to the search, we have minions, and I just have the ID here. And so basically what I want to do is I want to add to our routes another route. So in routes, right, I want to add one to get posters. So /posters, I'm going to add a slash. Because the idea here is I'm going to have /posters/ in the UUID. And that's going to return the poster. So handle posters. I'm just going to put it down here. So the poster ID will be the last part of the URL. So if I do /, I think, let's see, 0, 1, 2, so 3 of them, and the second one. If that's a little hard to do in your head, you can just trial and error until you figure it out. Okay. But split it into 3 pieces and the last one. That's what I'm thinking. I know there will be at least 3 pieces, so this code will never panic because of the way the URL is constructed. Even if they put nothing after this, there'll be at least 3. Okay. Because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get to this endpoint at all. It would go to this endpoint.
So your third item would just be empty. You've been input.
Yeah, yeah.
Your first item's empty, and your middle item's posters.
Exactly. Yep. Okay, so we have our poster ID. So all I have to do is make a context. Okay. And then I just say get file, right? And the name is just poster ID. Okay, so now I have my read closer and my error. So if error is not equal nil, actually, I'm just going to do not found. Then maybe we would block the error or something. And then all I have to do is say copy to the response, the read closer. But remember, I need to close it eventually. Okay? So I think this will work. So if I go to /poster/CID, I get the ID, then I get the file, and then I write it the response. Okay? So to change over here, instead of like this, I just write /posters/ that poster ID. Sorry, this is an image. And that should work. Okay?
Can you show the get file again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we pass in the name of it, and I'm using this UUID as the name. Bing.
Nice.
So, make sense? It's pretty straightforward.
The UUID, the posters ID that did you call it from the internet to find the image and put it on your page?
I went to IMDb and just downloaded it manually.
You downloaded it?
Yeah, and then I used the forum to upload it.
Alright.
So I chose the JPEG that I had downloaded, used the forum to upload it, it copied it into GCS, and then when I view it, it pulls it out. Okay? So improvements, you know, right now it has all these busted images, so we probably want to do something like only render this if there's a poster ID. That's easy enough to do. Otherwise, it'll just be a blank cell. That's okay. So that's easy to fix. There's another thing we can do to improve this, and I haven't messed around with this yet, so we're going to look how to do it real quick. But the downside of using get file like this is I've copied the file from Google Cloud Storage to App Engine, and then from App Engine to the client. And I should be able to make the user redirect to Google Cloud Storage, and then have them directly pull the file from Google Cloud Storage, right? And so instead of acting as a middleman, so say there's, you know, person A and person C and the person B in the middle, and instead of person B like taking the message from one and giving it to the other, instead of doing that, what we want to do is say, hey A, here's person C, you guys work together, okay? And so I don't have to act as a middleman anymore. And that would be more efficient, okay? That would be better. And so we should be able to do that.
Will App Engine reject, as a middleman, will it reject the file if it's too big? If you're using it as a middleman?
Yeah, there's various ways that can happen. There's a limited amount of, you have a quota on how much data you can transfer through App Engine. Definitely on the free, and it costs you money on the billing. The other place it'll hit you is if it's a large enough file and they have a slow enough internet connection, it's going to take longer than the 60 seconds you're allotted to download. It doesn't even have to be all that big, you know, for that to happen, to hit the minutes not that long. And so that's the other place you'll get the limitation. Whereas if you download directly from Google Cloud Storage, it doesn't have, and it's cheaper. Oh yeah, it's not App Engine, it's cloud. Oh boy. Storage is just a very popular name for things. I guess that's not surprising. Here we go. Okay, so I think what we need to do are two things. So one, we can get information about an object by doing this. And that returns a star object. And it has a variety of things. One of these is media link. So I think using media link, we can get out that URL that we can redirect them to. So what I'm proposing is instead of using get file, we get this link and redirect to the link, and then they can download the file from Google Cloud Storage instead. So let's try that real quick. So we go to routes. And so instead of this, what we need to do is add another function. And we'll call it get file link. And this is going to return a string in here. Now the string here should be a URL, okay? And we were getting the link to the file, not the file itself. And so I'm going to get back https://storage.google.com or whatever they call it, the URL. But it's not going to be an App Engine. It's not going to be my URL. It'll be a URL in Google Cloud Storage. And so we can use stat. So I'll get my cloud context. And say stat object. And this is like os.stat, which will give you file information. So I'm not opening a file, I'm saying, tell me about this file. And it will tell you its size, when it was created, you know, the name of it, all that stuff. That's what I'm asking for. Because part of that is a media link, right? And so this will return an object and possibly an error. Okay, so now I should have available to me all this stuff. And in particular this. That's what I'm looking for. So, return that. And no.
Nice.
So that'll give us our file link. Over here, in our route, instead of doing this, so we'll just comment that out. We'll say get file link. name is the poster ID. I'm going to call this media link.
How many million times have you typed that in your life?
A lot.
If error not nil.
It's very common. Okay, so I think what we can do is .redirect, res rec, media link, 3.0. We could use a 1. I'm just gonna do it. This is the case where you could actually use the 3.01.
Because this is essentially a permanent redirect. You're always going to find that image they entered here.
So we're basically saying you cannot change the image once you've uploaded it, which is okay because we generate a new UUID every time. So there's no way to change the original image. So whatever. So instead of serving them the file and redirect them to the file, and they should still get it. Okay. Now their browser should behave the same way, basically. They'll go to /poster ID, and then they'll be redirected. And even though this is from an image tag that we're doing this, it should still work. Okay.
So it's when it asks for, in the image tag, when it asks for that one file, it gets the redirect and then just gets the URL from what we redirected to. And it doesn't redirect the whole page, it just redirects that request.
That's
to the
right.
image.
Exactly.
Tricky.
So it failed, and this is why it failed. 401. Anybody remember what 401 means?
3 less than 404.
It means they're not authorized to view it. So the issue is that when we uploaded the image, but see this URL, Google APIs, this is a GCS URL, okay? The issue is that when we uploaded the image, we didn't set any ACLs on it. So it was restricted to people who have control of the bucket. Those are the only people allowed to read and write files. But I'm just some guy on the internet, and so I don't have access to this file. So what happened is when I tried to download it, I got a 4.
Okay.
So what we need to do is when we upload the image, we need to change it so that it has public access, that anybody's allowed to read it.
What is 401 access denied?
Something like that.
It's no big deal, just curious since you asked.
Unauthorized.
Unauthorized.
Right. There's a distinction between 401 and 402. Or 403. Nobody uses 402.
Payment required.
So this requires that authentication response must include blah, blah, blah. But then 403 is like, you know, you'll never be able to do this. Don't even try. It's something like that. 401's like you could if you had the right permissions, right? Okay, so we need to do that on upload. So we'll go to storage. And I didn't show you this, but I can do it now. There is a ACL here, and you can add to it. So rule. And then if we go look at the docs. So here's what I'm setting. So I'm setting the ACL rules on it. So it's a property called ACL. There's a list of access control rules for the object. And we're going to give it a list, and so I have to give it this list. And so an ACL rule is an entity and a role, and the role is owner or reader. So we'll use reader as our role. So what I do is add anybody can be reader. That's what I'm trying to do. The entity is things like user dash, group dash. There's a bunch of other ones you can do, but all we care about is all users. So what I want to do is add all users and the read, okay? So I can do that saying storage.all users storage.role reader. Okay. So what I've done is I've said create a writer. When you save the image, save it with this ACL list, and then write. Okay. So I should open permissions to everybody to be able to read it. So I should have made the image public.
Very cool.
So let's see if that actually works. I don't think I've tested this.
And you have to put that ACL when you put the file in the bucket.
Yeah.
You can't change it when you take it out.
you can change it. But you wouldn't want to change it when you read it, but you could change it as part of like a form or something. Typically, most of what we do in web data is relatively few writes and a whole lot of reads, right? IMDb, there's like 10 people who upload the image, and there's like 1 million people who look at it. And so you try to front load as much work as you can on the write side and make the read side as fast as possible. And so we wouldn't want to modify the permissions on reading. We'd want to modify the permissions on writing. Right? But you could on read change them. So let's add that again. Okay. There, it worked. I'm surprised. Okay, it actually worked. Okay, so this time, if I look at this image here, so that's the image URL. If I open that in a new tab, it downloaded it, but it will have, as part of this, actually pulled it off of, maybe I can get that to show up, off of Google servers. So see the pending here? There it is. See 302, 302. This one fails from the 401, but this one works. So the URLs are similar, but this one has public access, so anybody can read it, so the getting it succeeds. Make sense? So you can serve files as a pass-through through App Engine, but it's generally a better idea if you know these things are public, but they're not secret, to pass them through this way.
Now, will they serve just as quickly?
They'll serve faster.
Doing it that way, they'll serve faster doing it that way.
Absolutely. I don't know as much about GCS. I'd have to look at it, but I do know definitely with services like Amazon, they have a service called CloudFront, which is different than Cloudflare. CloudFront, which does CDN capabilities. So that means there are servers that are closer to the user that they'll get the file from. And so that can make a huge impact. Say you're serving this to somebody in Australia. Your site might be here in the US and it's a little bit slow, but then all of your content, your images, your scripts and stuff, if they're hosted through the CDN, they'll come from like a server like this. That could be in Australia that they're getting that content from, so it'd be much faster.
Is GCS a CDN?
I think, I'm not sure, I'd have to look at it. And I do know that definitely the buckets are regions, so you'd have to investigate that more fully.
Oh, the buckets are regional.
But what I am saying is that this server is almost certainly faster than App Engine.
Yeah.
And it's probably better than you could do on your own if you wanted.
Yeah.
Even if it's not faster, then you still have to get off that server anyway and suck it through App Engine. So you're putting another server.
That's right. Now, to be fair, the App Engine is sitting right next to that bucket.
Yes.
So he can get the file off of that, of the bucket, very quickly. Because it's if you think about it, App Engine is like here, then the cloud storage is like here, and then you're like way, way, way far away. So just, they have a really fast network, and it's literally right next to each other, so it's a lot faster, that kind of thing. But yeah, you're right, you're hitting both APIs. So there's no way the other way can ever really be faster. That just doesn't make sense. So any questions about that?
The one question that comes up for me is when you're receiving images from a user, often you want to, and so this is kind of a best practices, what's the best practice, but often, like I don't want to serve the full file, maybe not even store the full file. So like if I was like, I don't know, some site that allowed users to put pictures up, what's the best practice for storing those and serving them, and is there a library that allows you to resize or re-optimize or re-encode images?
Yes, there is. So the basic issue is that you upload a multi-megabyte image, and I want to show it as a tiny little poster.
Yeah.
I do not want to serve you the entire image. I would like to resize that, make it small, and serve that to my users, because that will save me a ton in bandwidth costs. Right? So I'm serving up like a 10 kilobyte image, not a 10 megabyte image. So that is 1/1000th of the cost for me. Right? Because it's tiny. It's like a little picture. It's not the full image. I don't need the whole image. So yes, there is a service that does that. It's called Images. And so maybe we'll look at this later. But so it says Blob Store. Blob Store is deprecated.
That's the thing about these docs are sometimes.
It's all in a state of transition.
Yeah.
There are libraries for Go. There's one built in. There's an image library for Go built in, and it can certainly do it. The issue is that that code's not very fast. That library is sort of not as good as other libraries. But maybe it's good enough, actually. You could certainly do that. JPEG? Yeah. Image JPEG. You know, you could decode it. It would give you back an image. This image. And you could resize in here. And there's some packages that people have written to do that. And maybe that would work. So you decode it to an image, resize the image, and then re-encode it here. And then you could give it, you know, you could say I want lower quality and all that stuff. And that would work. It's just not as fast as so there are people who have made JPEG libraries that are faster. But unfortunately, most of those rely on either a C library underneath or something that's like assembly or something. And so those things don't work on App Engine, because App Engine is a sandboxed environment that doesn't let you do anything unsafe. And so, like, literally use the unsafe package. And some of these depend on the unsafe package, and that's how they get their speed boost. And so that could be a little challenging. But yeah, you could use one of those libraries. You know, your package thumbnail provides simple interface to thumbnail or JPEG servers. You can use that. If it doesn't use unsafe, which is, who knows. Well, actually, we can find out. It imports 4 packages. Let's see. He imports 4 packages. We're going to have a problem. We can't use this library. Okay, because it depends on this library, which depends on unsafe. And we can't use unsafe in App Engine, so we wouldn't be able to use this library. So that can be a little challenging, and that's one of the challenges with App Engine, is that it's a sandboxed environment. You can't do everything you're allowed to do with Go. And most of the time that doesn't matter, because we usually just use pure Go and everything's great. But when you start dealing with this kind of stuff, it makes a big difference. These are highly optimized libraries doing very complicated operations. And so the difference between the very optimized version and the really easy version can be a huge difference in terms of how long it takes to run. So taking a multi-megabyte JPEG and resizing it is a very expensive operation as far as CPU speed. And so, you know, this may do it in 2 seconds, and the Go version may take a minute. I mean, it's hard to know. So,
Interesting, thank you.
they have a service.